Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the final episode of Class, The Lost, written by Patrick Ness, who also, of course, created the show, and is directed by Julian Holmes, which would be her only contribution to the Doctor Who universe. Now, this is the finale to the series, as a whole, unintentionally, as this story is like the conclusion to many story arcs and story elements that produced throughout series one of Class. It wraps up a lot of character traits and a character's emotions. It pays off a lot of character beats and character elements. However, it's clear when you watch this episode that this episode was the intent of trying to get the audience interested in a second series, as this story also sets up a lot of detail, a lot of elements that would have gone on into series two, even leaving the show on a cliffhanger. However, with the Class ratings being so enormously low, this episode only had 0.32 million viewers, which is a extraordinarily low viewing figures for just for like any program, anything. So that is very, it should tell you how concerning this was, and it was clear from the get-go that series 2 was very unlikely at this point when the episode was airing. I believe it was cancelled 3 or 4 weeks before this episode aired, as it was clear that nobody had really had any interest in it outside of the show. Patrick Ness seems to be very content with that. You know, he has stated in multiple interviews after the fact that if series 2 were to happen, he doubted he would be interested in returning. And also, you know, he was happy with what he did with Class. He liked what he did with the characters. He's glad that he got to do Class. But he's also glad that, you know, it didn't like stuck onto him, and he's happy to do other things. And Stephen Moffat and the rest of the cast seem to have just got on with the rest of their lives as if Class was just a footnote in Doctor Who history. But this is the conclusion to many aspects and many elements of series one, the only series of Class, and the unintentional final episode of this very strange and odd, and as far as I'm recording this, the last Doctor Who spin-off, live action anyway. And a lot of elements are tied into the previous 2 episodes, Detained and the Metaphysical Engine, or what Quill did. In fact, it picks up right after these 2 episodes, where Quill is free. She's got a scar on her eye, her hair's long, and she's also seemingly pregnant. And though that does become like an interesting part in her character, the whole concept of her being pregnant has nothing really to do with this story, and is clearly another element where going through this story, that this is an element that would be important had series 2 arrived. And one thing you've got to praise Class on is that he has some pretty big balls. Right off in like the first like opening act of the story, we see like our characters, they've all split out of each other. I think this is set like 3 weeks after the ending of Detained and the Metaphysical Engine. Quill has been in a coma for, I think they said 6 days. And our characters are seemingly splitting off. Like they go to school, but like Ram is missing. Tanya is much more closed off. Her mother tries to talk to her, and she just doesn't want to talk to her, doesn't want to listen to her. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Ram's father, Tanya's mother, two maybe not like important characters to the series, but like a fundamental element of the series has been so far, get murdered in brutal ways, where they have the Shadow King's blade like come out of their chest as they turn into dust. And Ram he has like a little like fight. I can't remember if he fights him, but he's quickly overpowered by the Shadow King, and it's kind of just like they come in, they just murder people, and then they just kind of leave, and they basically are building up um, to this idea, this concept. Now I am skipping a bit of the elements of the story. I'll try and remember my best, but surprisingly for a short like episode, it's literally an episode long, a lot of stuff gets crammed into this singular episode. Tanya becomes friends with Quill. They actually have this sort of bondage when Quill goes, and Tanya, she goes to Quill for comfort in a way, but then it kind of clicks into her that, wait, Charlie has the Cabinet of Souls, a device which is essentially made to kill all the Shadow King. We could just use that. And Ram, after the death of his father, and seems to be closed off by the rest of, with his relationship with April breaking in detained, and him having a very little care for Charlie, also really pushes forward the idea that they should use the Cabinet of Souls. This means that the dynamic interest here is at an all-time high, as it's basically pushing to what Charlie has been basically trying to prevent for the rest of the series, to use the Cabinet of the Souls to destroy all the Shadow King, with really only, throughout the series, Quill, only one who wants to use it. But now other characters, after their parents get brutally murdered, do also want to take actions into their own hands and prevail throughout the story. And this takes Ram and Tanya in much more darker aspects. There's a great bit where she basically states that she's afraid to go to school, in the case that, they went in for her mother, they killed her mother, but her brothers might still be out there. They're in school somewhere, they're in the library somewhere. But she's afraid to go to school in case the Shadow King has got them. And the idea of just seeing their body, seeing their corpse, or something bad happening to them, as well as her mother, is something that absolutely petrifies her. And so she asks Quill to train her into becoming a fighter. With some really great moments, little beats in this episode where Quill, she basically trains her to fight. Just like small little combat techniques. And there's a great line. It's like, great, now you've learned to defend yourself from a pregnant woman. I'd love that line. Quill, after her experience in the metaphysical engine, is a changed woman. She's a woman who's now free. She has been, she's no longer a slave to Charlie in the fact that she has the Ur inside her head, preventing her from using a weapon and doing any harm to Charlie. However, she has this kind of connection with him throughout the episodes, which means she doesn't automatically go against him. She's still sort of a slave in a way, but this time it's to her emotions. And there is this great element into the story where, usually in Quill society, the babies would come out of a litter of Quill. They would all murder each other and kill each other, only then for the main one to eat the remains of their mother as a sort of the mother's last bidding to the child, and is to look after them in the afterlife and stuff like that. But because she can kind of feel there's only one baby here, and because of the biology of her mate from the metaphysical engine episode, it seems to be much more in line with what we consider normal for us humans. And you can kind of see how the series has kind of affected her in a way where she doesn't have that ideology anymore, and she might even look after the baby once it's born. And also she has this kind of mother caring relationship with Tanya, though she does use her as a sort of weapon against Charlie to try and convince him to use the Shadow King, the Cabinet of Souls device. April here, despite April being one of the main characters of the series, she surprisingly gets very little to do. There's this whole dilemma that, if the Shadow King is destroyed and the main Shadow King, the king of the Shadow King, is destroyed, she is also killed as well because they're connected, their hearts are connected. That becomes a big plot point in this story, like it did in Bravish Hearts and Co-Owner of a Lonely Heart. And it's here, like, that's like her beat of the story. And that's a bit about it for her, which is really disappointing until we get to the very end, which we will go into. This story is mainly a Charlie episode where he is where everybody's trying to push him into a decision he doesn't want to do. He does try to find his best, with Mateus the only person really in the team who is strongly, just 100% strongly against using it, just on the sake that, Charlie doesn't want to do it, and it will turn him into some sort of monster who'd want to kill the Shadow King. Mass genocide of an entire species makes you no better than your enemies. And their relationship here kind of holds Charlie together. I still feel like in this episode, Mateus is kind of one note, and he's only really there to support Charlie or put Charlie in a particularly emotional state. Mateus himself isn't that interesting. Personally, I didn't really connect with the character. But them two decide that they need to get help, and they think of trying to think of any third option out of this. They then go to Dorothea, who works with the government, the government system. I can't remember what they're bloody called. The governess. I'm sure they're called the governess, which is this secret organization that runs the Coal Hill Academy and seems to be knowing about the space-time tear. If you've seen the rest of the class, you know what I'm on about. And we basically learn in this episode there's this door inside Coal Hill Academy which has kind of a space-time warped effect, and Dorothea uses this door to try and communicate with her superiors into finding out any information they can. Essentially, what we learn is actually something far worse. That actually something that the government, the governess, whatever they're called, something that they did has actually increased the effects of the cracks in space and time in Coal Hill Academy. And because of that, the Shadow King can now freely come to Earth wherever they choose, basically creating a mass invasion. One big issue I have with this story is you never really feel the invasion. There's a scene where you see Ram, he's going across the park, and you can see kind of people shadows getting taken, and then the Shadow King kind of come out. You can clearly tell that the small budget isn't working in this episode's favour. You never feel like the world's in danger. It always feels like a can full of people, maybe the size of a small street at most, is in danger. But the Shadow King wants to not only take April, but also take the Cabinet of Souls, destroy it, so that there's no weapon against them. And this all leads into this final adventure, this final battle where all of our main characters are in the hall room. Actually, I think Ram comes in like a lot later. And the Shadow King takes Mateus as prisoner, knowing that this is the guy that Charlie loves. And Charlie is pointing a gun to him, and there's this whole dilemma here. It's something that we've seen 100 times before in fiction. The whole hurt me and you will hurt your love interest, but you'll never do that because your soul and heart, I can manipulate you. And it's done 100 times better before in other shows. But you do care enough about these characters that you do, or at least you do care about Charlie in this episode, to really hit home that effect. But then the story kind of does something really odd. The Shadow King kind of, well, as soon as April comes into the picture, she's like, you need me, it's me that you want, because our hearts are connected. If you take me prisoner, then the heart is essentially all yours. And the Shadow King buys it. He releases Mateus to use April as a prisoner, basically the same scenario, but instead of Mateus, Charlie's love interest, and easily the one that would manipulate Charlie the most, it's now April. And Charlie does the only thing that he, at this point in time, can see is an option for him. And he shoots April, and killing both her and the Shadow King. And there's this like really big dramatic moment. I was in complete shock. You know, they killed one of the main characters in the first series. That's kind of a really big deal. And like April was like not teased, but she was building up to be like the main character of the series. Although her death, we were later to see in the episode, isn't that big a deal. This means now, because Charlie basically killed both versions of the king, the monarchy of the Shadow King, he basically becomes the king of the Shadow King. But this power, this ideology that this is maintaining within him, he absolutely hates it, and the only option he can see is to use the Cabinet of Souls. The logic here doesn't really make much sense. I do understand the idea of it. I do understand the precedent of it. However, like, the story, like, because it happens like in a manner of a second, like literally he kills April, he kills the Shadow King, he realizes this, and it's like, okay, I've got to use the Cabinet of Souls now. You do know you are now in control of this deadly destructive army. Why don't you just send them back? Why don't you, I don't know, go onto the planet and make them a force for good? Make them a force where they will defend life, not take it. Nope, his first reaction is to genocide them, which kind of makes him look absolutely mental in the context of the story. He seemingly just kills a bunch of a warrior race that is dedicated to him now for seemingly no reason, where they're only reacting as soon as they realize that Charlie is going to use the Cabinet of Souls. They seem to be like completely still, cannot take any action against Charlie's wishes until they definitively know that Charlie will cause genocide on their people, even into this magnificent action scene, finishing off with Charlie using the Cabinet of Souls with this effect, which sometimes looks great, sometimes looks really, really bad. Like there's this bit where it cuts to the other characters in the cast, and it's clear that like it's a filter, and they've just kind of moved around the CGI effect, so it's like passing through them. But we do get these long shots of the Wiggles, the souls going around the Shadow King, and just completely annihilating all of them. One soul is still left after the destruction, the genocide of the Shadow King. I forgot to mention earlier on in the episode, the King of the Shadow King put a shadow onto the soul of Charlie, so that if he uses the Cabinet of Souls, Charlie will also die. But he accepts that. He accepts his fate. And he is allowing himself to get killed by the lost soul of the Cabinet of Souls, only for Quill to jump in the way and save his life. The soul seemingly travels to Ram, holding April's body, before the scene cuts black, and we are then reintroduced to Dorothea, who is at a meeting with the council people, the government, the governess, and we basically learn that there's this thing called the arrival, the preparation for the arrival, and that they were planning on using the Cabinet of Souls as a deterrent, as something that they could use during this arrival. But the plans have failed as they used the device. And so the rest of them basically decide that Dorothea is going to die. And it's like, it's a shame you won't live long enough to see the arrival. And they all turn their backs, and we get to see Dorothea get essentially killed by a weeping angel. A weeping angel has a cameo in class, and it seems to be setting up this massive storyline, which seems to have something to do with a giant, massive weeping angel, which we see in like a stone carving, with some of the pieces missing. I think one of them is the face, but you see like a lot of little angels, and you see like this massive giant Weeping Angel, seemingly bigger than a city. Could it be the Statue of Liberty? Who's to say? None of us anymore because series 2 didn't happen. This was so clearly like it's so constant. It's like, wait until you see series 2, but it never happened. Big Finish has not touched any of this, by the way. None of Big Finish's class episodes take place after this episode. They all take place after series 1 because the contract for Big Finish was actually the contract. I believe the episodes were actually also made prior to the cancellation of series 2. So they didn't realize that class was going to be finished. So nothing so far in any medium has picked up after class. So we never learn about the survival. In the Doctor Who canon, there's just this strange evil organization which is preparing this event for Weeping Angels, only for it to never happen, or at least it's like just constantly waiting for this arrival. It's absolutely hilarious. The final act of the story, we basically got back to our main characters. Charlie's looking around. It's like, it should have been me. I should have been the one that died. And our characters are like in shock. It's like, what's going on? They seem to have all woken up and something strange happens. They all seem to blank out for a bit. Only for the Shadow King to get up from the floor, seemingly revived. Ram holds a gun up to the Shadow King. All of our characters are in utter shock. Only for the Shadow King to speak in April's voice. Why are you looking at me so strangely? Why are you looking at me like that? Why is everyone looking at me? And that's the cliffhanger the class ends on. A really big deal. So anyway, that is The Lost. Overall, I didn't enjoy it. I must be honest with you. Most of the story seems mainly focused on setting up stuff for series 2. And it feels very hollow, especially when you consider that series 2 never happened. But the episode has nothing really going for it on its own. With the exceptions of it building up from the elements of character development from Detained and the Metaphysical Engines to really great episodes. The story has nothing on its own to really mark as interesting. There are some really big, plot points like Charlie finally using the Cabinet of Souls to kill the Shadow King, a big event in the series, as well as a lot of main characters seemingly just being absolutely brutally killed. But they're all substantial to this plot line, which is just mainly set up, mainly built up for a series that never happened. And it's a kind of shame because Class did have great episodes, which made it worthwhile. Detained, the Metaphysical Engine, the rest of the series was kind of lacking, but those 2 episodes really worth it, and it's a shame that it just ended on such a low note. So yeah, that's Class. That's The Lost and the Class series as a whole. So we can finally finish all the spin-offs as far as I'm recording this. So join me next time where we go back to the Doctor as he's dealing with his blindness. A new foe seems to have taken over, intents of taking over the world, and it's up to Bill and Nardole to really figure out what's going on as the Doctor tries to hide his blindness from the rest of the team. So join me next time for the Monk trilogy, which consists of Extremis, The Pyramid at the End of the World, and Lie of the Land. And I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-ra!